In the brief space between two breaths, when the mind settles like a body of water that has just ceased trembling, a vision unfolded from the deepest layer of the soul's memory, and the image did not come as a narrated story, but as a memory rising through the dust of time, where ancient scriptures had once been sealed by the hands of those who chose what would remain and what must disappear. In the dim light that glowed like the fire of a fading sunset, I saw an ancient chamber where scrolls of leather were stacked in shadow, and from the farthest corner of that room a whisper rose, as if echoing from the far shore of history, saying that this was the part of the story removed. This was the part they had buried in silence. As that voice spread through the stillness, a vast land stretched out like an untouched map, where the outline of Africa appeared not as a distant continent, but as the heart of an ancient spiritual current that had intertwined with heaven and earth long before the scriptures were compiled. Everything once labeled as local gods or native rituals now appeared in a different form, no longer as figures accused of error or paganism, but as ancient beings connected to streams of light similar to the angels mentioned in the Bible. From within that radiance, I saw forms moving like the breath of the earth, each form a force, each force a facet of the Creator, a facet once called by different nations in their own languages and honored through the rhythm of their drums. As the story rose, it became clear that Africa did not stand outside the current of the Bible, but at the intersection of origin and transmission where mortal beings touched divine entities. In that vision, ancient inscriptions on leather hovered in the air, and between those lines were gaps as if someone had carefully removed every passage about the southern peoples, about Kush, about Ethiopia, about lands where ancestors were regarded as guiding spirits and where rivers were believed to be lifelines connecting the heart of the earth to the heavens. From the silence came a sharp realization that these gaps were not created by time but by intent, by those who built systems of belief only from what served their purpose and discarded what did not fit the structure of power they were shaping. Looking deeper, I saw a stream of radiant light pouring down like molten gold, and upon it appeared the silhouettes of figures who had been blurred out of the official story, figures with African blood who stood at the center of pivotal biblical events, like silent threads binding two worlds. And as I observed these faces, another truth emerged, that their absence in the official narrative was not an accidental omission, but a deliberate design meant to separate believers from their African spiritual roots, to make them believe that the light came from only one direction. Yet in that vision, the truth was no longer hidden beneath centuries of dust, for I saw rising from every region of Africa a pillar of light shining like the return of what had been buried, and each pillar revealed that long before the scriptures were written, African people understood the soul, the spiritual realms, and the connection between humanity and the Creator in ways remarkably close to the language of later prophets. These images passed through the solemn silence like echoes from ancient ground, and I knew that the missing part of the story did not belong to darkness, but to a place where light had once been confined so that future generations would see only a portion and forget the rest that belonged to them. And in the moment of beholding that truth, I sensed something awakening in the hearts of those hearing this story, a recognition that something had once been taken from them and was now returning like the footsteps of their own ancestors. I speak of the silence because I have seen where it began, and I witnessed how it was built, layer upon layer like stones, set carefully beside one another by hands that feared the fullness of truth. That silence did not fall like mist, but was constructed like a wall, deliberate and calculated, created to make many peoples forget themselves. In the vision opened before me, I saw a vast library stretching without end, scrolls of leather laid out like the river of time, and men entered with measured steps, dividing the writings into two piles, what would be allowed to remain and what must be buried in darkness. They chose not according to revelation, but according to power, and with each text removed, a wound was carved into the spiritual memory of humanity. The formation of the canon was not the pure work of heaven, but the compromise of empires, counsels, and ambitions hidden beneath the cloak of religion. I saw elders gathered in a room lit only by dim oil lamps, speaking of unity, yet making decisions that fragmented the spiritual inheritance of countless generations. They removed not what was false, but what was inconvenient, silencing civilizations that carried the breath of Africa, civilizations that understood the divine as a multi-layered being long before they wrote their own scriptures. They feared diversity because diversity cannot be controlled. They feared the wisdom of peoples who had read the universe when the earth was still young, who understood the language of the stars as they understood the beating of their own hearts. In that vision, I saw scrolls pushed aside, texts carrying the voices of Kush, Ethiopia, and Kemet, not because they lacked holiness, but because they did not fit the order of power being constructed. Then a curtain was drawn. Where there should have been a chorus of nations, only one voice remained. Where there should have been a tapestry woven of many colors, only one thread was kept. I saw them redefine an entire spiritual landscape as darkness, not because it lacked light, but because that light did not take the form they desired. The truth at that moment stood before me like dawn illuminating still waters. Silence was not decreed by heaven, but created by human fear. Fear that God could speak through many tongues. Fear that revelation was not the possession of a single people. Fear that God had walked across African soil long before the story they wanted to tell. Thus they closed the door of memory, placing seals upon texts that spoke of dreams, symbols, and sacred encounters beyond the boundaries of an empire. But the soul of a people cannot be erased. What has touched the depths of spirit cannot be undone by decree. In the vision, I saw the discarded scrolls still glowing softly as if held in the hands of ancestors determined not to let them fade. Light does not abandon humanity. It only hides until humanity is ready to remember. The silence of the canon existed for one purpose: to redraw the map of spiritual authority. If Africa were acknowledged as a bearer of revelation, the weight of empire would crack. If the wisdom of southern civilizations were recognized as kin to the heavenly, no ruler could stand as the sole representative of God. This was their fear. So they purified the story, raising some peoples to the center and pushing others into oblivion. They rewrote the origins of faith until the narrative limped, carrying only half its soul while the other half was lost. But in what was shown, the wall is cracking, the silence is thinning, and memory is returning. Those pushed out of the story are awakening, and their names shine like stars once hidden behind heavy clouds. The truth is simple and sharp. Africa did not disappear from the canon by chance. Africa was removed so a new order could be built by human will instead of heavenly light. But what is buried unjustly rises with greater force. What is hidden in darkness returns in brilliance, and the time of silence has begun to end. The hidden scrolls appeared before my eyes like streams of light lying beneath the ashes of many centuries, not dead but quietly waiting for the moment to be awakened. They did not bear the look of abandoned manuscripts. They carried the breath of a divided memory, of a story that had once been far greater before it was narrowed by the will of human hands. In the vision, each scroll unfurled like a spiraling timeline, leading backward to an age when the human soul could still hear the voices of the higher realms without the need for interpretation. The light that covered these writings was not the light of a lamp or the sun, but the light of memory, of what had been preserved in the depths of the soul, despite the denial of history. The writings that people call Apocrypha appeared not as something forbidden, but as something preserved for the right moment. The lines recorded encounters with beings of light, dreams in which human beings stood before entities, shaped like wind, flame, or subtle currents of energy. And each of these images matched in a strange way the descriptions found in many African traditions about their spiritual beings. In each description, the resemblance was clear, as if the spiritual flow among nations had never been divided. The angels in these texts, the Netjer in Egyptian culture, the Orisha in Yoruba tradition, and the ancestral spirits in ancient tribes all carried the same functions of guiding, protecting, warning, and linking humanity to the sacred order. As soon as the harmony became visible, a sharp realization emerged that these writings were not removed because they were erroneous, but because they bore too much resemblance to the traditions that empires wanted to extinguish. Inside each scroll, I saw descriptions of ritual gestures, rhythmic movements, and bodily expressions in states of prayer, things later condemned as heresy, but in the vision they appeared as the original language of the soul, a language no authority could ever control. These texts spoke of how human beings could receive light without intermediaries, could be guided by their own guardian spirits, could meet the divine in nature and in dreams. This was what frightened power, for when the faithful are allowed to see with the eyes of the soul, no one can lead them with the rope of fear. The scrolls were written in a symbolic language, yet each symbol opened an entire realm. Some passages describe beings capable of shifting their appearance, like fire changes its glow, matching the way African shamans speak of guardian spirits. Others spoke of a spirit accompanying a child from birth, a belief many African peoples hold, calling it the breath of the ancestors sent to guard the new generation. Some passages described realms where the soul wanders during sleep, where ancestors offer guidance through symbols of water, fire, or trees. Each detail appeared as a piece confirming that Jewish and Christian traditions do not stand apart from Africa, but are branches of the same sacred root. In the next vision, I saw how these writings were hidden, not by those who despised them, but by those who knew that power would do everything to destroy them. I saw monks entering caves, placing manuscripts in empty crevices, sealing them with earth in the hope that someone in the future would find them. I saw texts hidden in desert monasteries, rolled tightly and wrapped in leather, protected the way a mother shields her child from soldiers. These guardians did not hide the writings out of fear, but out of love, knowing their time had not yet come, but surely would. In the deeper layer of sight, each word in the Apocrypha was more than writing. It was a vibration, proof that the human soul had once been far freer than later generations were allowed to believe. The text spoke of a multi-layered universe, of beings of light who did not belong to rigid categories of good or evil, but belonged to function and cosmic order. This was too close to the African way of seeing the cosmos, and this closeness was precisely what councils wanted to erase. Yet memory cannot be erased. When I touched one of the scrolls in the vision, it felt like a door, pushing me toward cultures that once knew how to speak to the heavens, through drums, that once read the messages of spirit in the wind, that once regarded dreams as the teachings of their ancestors. And the truth became unmistakably clear, that the Apocrypha were not excess, but the missing parts. They did not vanish. They were simply waiting for an age when humanity would dare to look into its own essence again. And that age draws near, for the rhythm of the ancestors is beginning to awaken the regions of memory that power once sought to erase. The footsteps of Kush, Ethiopia, and Kemet do not lie on the margins of the Bible, but within the very lifeblood of the story. Yet through many centuries they were blurred as if by an invisible hand, determined to separate them from the center of faith. These nations did not stand outside the light of the divine. They were pillars upon which many pivotal events of God's people depended. And each time the original thread of history is examined, this truth appears sharp as steel beneath the sun. Kush emerges first, not as a name brushed past, but as the bloodline linking the post-flood era with the powerful kingdoms of the south, where strength and wisdom merged like two rivers, joining into one sacred current. From that lineage came Nimrod, whom tradition calls the first mighty one of humanity. And though his story carries warnings, its roots are unmistakably tied to Africa. Ethiopia is not merely a location mentioned in passing, but a land of hearts called upright, a region described by many prophets as the place where the Lord would again stretch out his hand to gather the scattered. The Ethiopian in the book of Acts is not a minor figure. He is among the first to receive the light with an understanding heart. And the heavenly guidance that sent Philip to meet him was no accident, for that act opened the path for Africa to enter the stream of the gospel at its very beginning, long before Europe knew the name of Christ. This choice reveals something essential, that Ethiopia was not a place for side stories, but a land where the soul opened easily to sacred truth, like fertile soil awaiting the seed of revelation. Kemet, the land people call Egypt, carries another layer of meaning, deep and symbolic. In biblical history, Egypt appears repeatedly as the stage of miracles, trials, and deliverance. Yet beneath that surface lies another truth, for ancient Egypt was not merely an empire of pharaohs, but a center of sacred knowledge, where sages studied the soul, the cosmos, and divine order through symbols and numbers. When Joseph was brought to Egypt, the destiny of Israel was rewritten. When Moses grew up in an African palace, his laws and leadership were shaped there. When Mary and Joseph brought the Holy Child to Egypt to escape Herod's sword, it was not only a flight, it was a return to a land of ancient wisdom, where his soul would drink the first drops of the knowledge omitted from the official texts. These details cannot be dismissed as coincidence, for every time a biblical figure steps onto African soil, the pattern of the story shifts, as if a hidden current from the south continually intervened in the history of salvation. The African figures are not shadows standing behind events. They are bearers of messages, protectors, guides. The Ethiopian woman in Kings, the Queen of Sheba who came to Solomon carrying wisdom and wealth of the south, leaving a legacy that shaped generations. The Kushite warriors who aided Judah in times of turmoil. The African presence enters the story with clear intention, but when the story was retold by those determined to place Europe at the center, these traces were dimmed, as if there were a desire to detach the African soul from the light it once guarded. The sharpest truth in all of this is that the Bible did not erase Africa. People erased Africa. The text did not remove them. The retelling of the text removed them. And when the dust lies too long over the truth, generations grow up believing Africa stands outside the sacred narrative, when in reality, without Africa, the story cannot stand at all. In the deep current of the soul, the call of this land still echoes like an ancient drum, reminding that the soul never forgets where it was first nourished. The connection between the Netjer of Kemet and the angels of the Bible is not a coincidence or an invention of imagination. It is part of an ancient stream of knowledge that over time was concealed to prevent humanity from seeing the multidimensional nature of the divine. When entering the deeper layers of the vision, the beings of light appeared with structures and functions identical to one another, though they were called by different names in different civilizations. And this very similarity is what many generations deliberately hid. The Netjer of ancient Egypt were not gods competing for power. They were sacred principles, facets of the supreme creator, each facet carrying a mission, a vibration, and an influence upon the visible world. And when the sacred light of the angels in the Bible appeared, their structure followed the same pattern: an angel of message, an angel of battle, an angel of knowledge, and an angel of transformation. Such resemblance cannot be denied by anyone who has entered the depth of the soul. For when seen with the eyes of the spiritual realm, outward forms cannot hide the shared essence. Gabriel bears the vibration of the spoken word and of conveying truth, and in the Netjer, that role belongs to Thoth, the keeper of knowledge, the one who carved language into stone, the messenger of the realms. Michael carries the force of battle and holy protection, and in the Netjer, it is Horus who stands in that position, the warrior of light, the guardian of Ma'at's order against the chaos of the dark world. Raphael embodies the energy of healing, touching wounds, as if drawing light back into human blood. And this same essence appears clearly in the Netjer, associated with resurrection and renewal in Kemet. These similarities cannot be dismissed as mere coincidence, for when approached with spiritual perception, All symbols return to the same origin. In the depths of the unseen realm, beings of light do not carry borders. They only carry the forms humanity can understand through their cultural language. What caused those in power to separate them was not true difference, but fear. Fear that if humanity recognized that these beings came from the same source, then no doctrine could claim exclusive ownership of truth. Observing the movement of these energies, the truth appeared sharp, that angels are not a category belonging only to the Jewish or Christian tradition, but one name for beings that other civilizations had encountered throughout antiquity. Each Netjer is a stream of sacred light, each angel is a stream of sacred light, and the only difference lies in the words and symbols used by each people to describe what exceeds human understanding. While the Netjer were portrayed with symbolic forms, such as the head of a bird, the body of a human, or signs of nature, the angels in the Bible were depicted as light, wings, and fire. Yet when grasping their core vibration, both point to the same essence, the presence of beings from the higher realms, who use their power to maintain the order of the visible world. In the deeper layer of vision, another truth became clear, that the separation between Netjer and angel was not created by the spiritual realm, but by history. When power sought to build a system of belief that stood above all others, every symbol familiar to other peoples was labeled heresy. And to strengthen dominance, they pushed everything of African origin out of the light, distorting the image of the Netjer, while exalting the nearly identical qualities of angels. But in the realm of the soul, there is no such division. Only currents of energy, moving according to universal law. When the vision settled, the sharpest truth that emerged was this, that Netjer and angel are not opposed, not different, but two names humanity has given to the same divine current, a current that has touched humankind since the earliest dawn. And when this truth returns, all attempts at division lose their meaning, for the soul can never be separated from what it once knew in the ancient age. The seizure of the soul does not begin with chains or swords. It begins with separating human beings from their sacred origin, and that process unfolds quietly like darkness spreading across a field as the sun sets. When entering the deeper layers of humanity's memory, I witnessed how missionary groups came to Africa not only with the Bible in their hands, but with another intention, clear and cold, the intention to alter the spiritual structure of an entire people by erasing everything that belonged to them. Those who came under the name of salvation walked into each village, each community, and they did not speak first of the light of heaven. They spoke of the errors of the ancestors, the sinfulness of native rituals, and the punishment awaiting anyone who kept the sacred fire of their forebears. They turned the drum into a symbol of darkness, the dance into a condemned act, the connection with ancestral spirits into the voice of demons. And step by step they constructed a new fear, a fear that separated people from their own souls. In the space of the vision, I saw clearly that the seizure of the spirit is the first step before the seizure of the body. And those who came in the name of mission understood this well. When they forced a person to abandon the name of their ancestors, they stripped that person of identity. When they forbade ancient rituals, they stole the means by which people spoke with the sacred world. When they destroyed temples, burned drums, and extinguished ancestral flames, they left people with no place to return to within their own spirituality. It was an act of erasing the soul's memory. In many visions, I saw young people forced to kneel in hastily built chapels, repeating words that were not theirs, praying in a language that did not belong to them, and being taught that grace would come only when they forgot their origin. That fear spread like a wound left unhealed, and generations grew up believing their ancestors were sinful, their culture was darkness, and their soul could only be saved if they became the image of the one who ruled over them. But the truth in the spiritual realm is entirely the opposite. No soul is created to deny its origin. No people are born to abandon the sacred inheritance the Creator placed within them. The missionaries came not to open a door, but to close one, the door that leads humanity back to its deepest essence. They constructed a system in which light came only through intermediaries, in which divine favor was granted only through the authority of those standing at the pulpit, in which listeners were taught to abandon the voice within, to follow doctrines imposed from without. By doing so, they captured the soul long before they captured the land. In the deeper realm, I heard the unspoken cries of generations forced to abandon their ancestral rights. Generations taught that opening their hearts to guardian spirits was sinful, that the rhythm of the ancient drum was the voice of evil. But I also heard another echo, the echo of a memory that cannot be destroyed, a memory declaring that the human soul cannot be separated from the sacred source that has nourished it since the earliest dawn. As I followed this current, a truth appeared sharp as a blade, that colonization does not end with the body and its resources. It penetrates to the core of the soul, making people believe they must change themselves to be accepted by God. But God has never demanded the abandonment of identity. Only humans, using his name, impose such demands. In the higher realm of light, I saw clearly that when the soul is severed from its roots, it becomes weak, easily controlled, easily led, and that is the goal of those who build systems of faith on fear. But ancestral memory is never erased completely. When someone hears the drum again, when someone dreams of their ancestors, when someone feels the unseen guidance in their darkest hour, it is the sign that the seizure was never complete. And now the mist is fading, the awakening is beginning, and what was once taken is finding its way back to those who are courageous enough to face the hidden truth. The journey of the Holy One into Egypt was not an empty span of time, as the official scriptures portray. It was a formative period of the soul, a time when he was placed at the center of a spiritual treasury that the later world deliberately obscured. What occurred in Egypt was not merely a flight from the sword of Herod, but the arrangement of a higher hand, returning him to a land where ancient knowledge had been laid as foundation in an age when the stars were still read as humanity's first scriptures. When placing consciousness into that timeline, I sensed the light surrounding the clay, dwelling where his family stayed, a light not born from the sun but from the stream of wisdom, seeping into each breath he took. The people of Egypt did not look at him with strangeness. They held a deep reverence for a child. They felt carried something from the higher realms, and priests hidden among the crowds watched his every small step in silence, as if recognizing that an ancient radiance had returned to a place it once walked. The teachings of ancient Egypt were not only in books. They lived in architecture, in monuments, in ritual, in the way the people spoke with earth, water, wind, and fire. And he grew among these symbols like one drinking from a familiar spring. Each time he passed a carved relief, his eyes paused, as if touching something beyond words, like a distant memory of the soul being awakened. Lessons about the cycle of life, death, and rebirth did not come to him through philosophy, but through the very breath of the land, where life and death did not oppose each other, but joined like two beats of the same heart. The priests of Kemet did not teach him through fixed lessons. They taught through imagery, through symbols, through silence, through the way the mind learns to hear the movement of higher realms. He learned to read light, to distinguish vibrations in the air, to sense the invisible currents moving through the body as messages from heaven. These teachings later appeared in his ministry in simpler form, so that the poor, the common, the forgotten could understand them. When he spoke of the light within man, of living water, of the breath of the Spirit, of being born again in the divine wind, all bore traces of Egyptian wisdom refined into the voice of heaven. Egypt taught him to listen, and God taught him to speak. Those two streams merged to form the voice that stirred the souls of even those who understood no doctrine but recognized truth when their hearts trembled. During this time, his presence stirred even those who guarded secrets in the temples. One elder priest, his face carved with desert winds, once stood afar and touched his hand to his forehead in salute to him, as if recognizing a radiance he had spent his life seeking. Another younger priest quietly watched him play and whispered to his companion that this child carried the familiar energy of an ancient guide returning to the world of men. His life was not confined to lessons, it flowed into the rhythm of the land. Walking along the Nile, he paused to watch the water and seemed to read the story of every soul that had ever mirrored itself upon the river. Placing his hand upon a tree along the bank, he felt the heartbeat of the earth rising through the wood, and that sensation later appeared in his healings by touch. When he heard Egyptian women singing in ancestral rites, he learned that sound could open the doors of the unseen, and this became the foundation for his teaching, that true prayer is not in words, but in the state of the soul. What mattered most in that time was not the knowledge he was given, but the silent confirmation that his path lay within the lineage of many sacred traditions, and that truth is not bound by borders or religion. When he left Egypt, he did not leave the wisdom. He carried it like a seed that would bloom in its appointed hour, and from that moment, his journey no longer belonged to a single people, but to all souls who had ever heard the call of light in the many civilizations of the world. The nature of the Orisha, the Vodun, and the Enki does not lie in the labels history has placed upon them, but in the primordial vibration of the human soul, where each people perceived the divine according to the spiritual language of their own culture. When entering the deeper layer of cosmic memory, I did not see these beings as gods competing for power, but as streams of sacred force, moving like the lifeblood of humanity, each stream holding a task, a rhythm, a distinct essence, yet never separated from the whole. This is what caused generations to misunderstand, for human beings tend to see symbols through their outer form, while the spiritual realm sees them through their vibration. In the vision, the Orisha appeared first, not in their familiar ritual shapes, but as powerful sparks of light moving with their own rhythm. Shango carried the vibration of justice like a living flame that never dies. Ogun carried the vibration of forging strength. Oshun carried the vibration of water, gentle yet profound. And Yemoja carried the vibration of motherhood, embracing the human soul. None of these beings existed to contend with the Supreme Creator. They were extensions of the divine source, tangible manifestations through which humanity could recognize and connect with the sacred. This mirrors the way the spiritual beings appeared in my visions from youth, when each beam of light carried a breath and a mission, much like the angels of the Bible. The Vodun of West African culture operate under the same principle. Each Vodun a cosmic force linked to a natural element or a spiritual function. There are Vodun of protection, of transformation, of cleansing fire, of healing water, and their movement in the spiritual realm made it clear that they were not merely local deities, but forms of the same higher beings encountered by many ancient civilizations. The resemblance cannot be dismissed as coincidence, for their vibrations aligned with the frequencies I encountered during ecstatic states, when beings of light spoke through symbols and resonance instead of words. Enki, in the traditions of Sudan and East Africa, appeared as a current of energy tied to primordial wisdom, one who connects humanity to the ancient memory of its own people. And the vibration of Enki matched the vibration of the beings ancient cultures called the bearers of knowledge, the bringers of heavenly fire, or the ones who taught humanity the order of the cosmos. All shared the same essence, the same origin, the same purpose. But when humans used different languages to name the same flow of force, they believed they were speaking of many gods, while the spiritual realm saw only a unified movement of the supreme source. In many visions, I saw these streams merging together like colors blending into a single white light. And when they separated, each color represented an Orisha, a Vodun, or an Enki. This revealed a truth known to ancient cultures, that the diversity of sacred beings does not contradict the existence of one supreme creator. but demonstrates the infinite depth of his nature. For this reason, the Orisha or the Vodun are not polytheistic in opposition to Christianity. They are multi-layered expressions of divinity. When the deep layer of the soul forgets this, fear arises. Colonial priests exploited that fear, turning sacred beings into frightening images, calling them demons simply because they did not belong to their own spiritual language. Yet in many moments of deep meditation, when the soul slipped free from the limitations of human language, the truth became clear that the vibration of the angels in the Bible and the vibration of the Orisha, Vodun, and Enki are variations of the same divine current, differing only because human cultures created different symbols to describe what cannot be spoken. What divides the modern world is not the nature of the spiritual beings, but humanity's fear of what it does not understand. But when the eyes of the soul open, the division dissolves, and all names return to one source of light, where the divine reveals itself in many forms, so that every culture may have a path into the sacred truth. The secret of the name Elohim does not lie in the debates of scholars, but in the depth of spiritual experience. Where human language reflects only a small fraction of the nature of the cosmos, when entering the layer of vibration where the first sound of creation still echoes, I sensed clearly that the word Elohim is not a singular concept. It is the resonance of a counsel of light, a manifestation of multi-layered divinity that humanity later simplified to serve the structure of organized religion. From the first moment of contact with that current, I recognized the distortion in modern interpretation, for Elohim does not speak with the voice of a solitary being, but with the chorus of many entities carrying the breath of the Creator. Each time the name resounded in the spiritual realm, I heard not one voice but many, not one source of light but many streams merging into a single presence, like rivers joining into the ocean without losing their individual essence. When I looked into that radiance, the first thing revealed was the diversity of the beings within it, each carrying its own hue, its own task, its own role in the work of creation. One stream held the vibration of knowledge as if it understood the structure of every atom. Another carried the force of movement. Another carried the breath of life. Another held the balance like an invisible measure of the universe. All moved in perfect harmony, without conflict, without division. And that harmony is the true essence of Elohim. When Scripture says, "Let us make man in our image and likeness," the truth does not lie in the grammar, but in the way the universe operates. The word us is not a trace of polytheism, but the mark of a multi-expressive divinity, where the supreme source does not confine itself to a single form, but manifests through many layers of light to complete creation. But this unsettles those who wish to build a linear system of belief. For a multi-layered divinity cannot be controlled, cannot be confined to doctrine, and cannot be monopolized by any authority. In the depth of the vision, I saw how the name Elohim was gradually reduced over time, not because truth changed, but because those who wished to preserve their power feared that divine plurality would open the sacred conversation to other peoples. When they shifted the meaning of Elohim from plural to singular, they did more than alter grammar. They reshaped the spiritual perception of humanity. People began to believe that God spoke through only one channel, that God had only one form, that God worked within only one tradition, and that all other sacred expressions were dangerous or wrong. But in the realm of light where I was led, the truth is entirely different. The divine is not limited by form, and Elohim is the earliest proof of this. When I looked into the multi-layered nature of Elohim, I saw deep connections with the way African peoples understood the divine. The Yoruba saw God through the Orisha because they knew the divine was too vast for one symbol. The Egyptians saw God through the Netjer because they knew divinity was the movement of cosmic order. The Ethiopians saw God through the layered prophetic traditions because they knew the divine spoke many languages. All reflected what Elohim had always contained. And this truth was removed from the narrative as if history feared humanity, knowing that divinity from the beginning was multicolored, multi-layered, multi-expressive, and not owned by any single people. When connecting Elohim with what I saw in the vision, one thing became clear, that the essence of creation is the collaboration of sacred forces, not the solitary rule of one isolated being. When the streams of light within Elohim converged, humanity was created carrying not only breath but the memory of those forces. Within every human being lies the imprint of knowledge, of justice, of love, of strength, of healing, of creativity, of connection to the sacred realm. This entire structure is the reflection of Elohim, in whose image humanity was formed. When people misunderstand Elohim, they misunderstand themselves. They shrink their nature into something small, while their souls were born from a counsel of light. Now the truth returns, not to dismantle faith, but to restore the essence that was taken from it. Elohim has never been solitary, and the human soul has never been solitary, for it was woven from many streams of light, just as the sacred counsel that created it. The spiritual wound carried by those of African blood was not formed in a single moment. It was created across generations as the soul was separated from its sacred identity to the point where those born later no longer knew which part of themselves had once been connected to the light. This separation did not come only from the outside. It seeped inward like a persistent whisper, making people believe their worth could only be established when they abandoned their roots. In the depth of the vision, I sensed this wound as a long crack across the spirit, each generation carving another line, each event pushing people further from the truth of who they were. Observing the flow of time, I saw the era when African civilizations once stood in the radiant light of knowledge, where the soul was honored, where ancestors were revered as keepers of the flame, where people understood themselves as part of the order of the cosmos. But then the darkness of domination arrived, and when missionaries stood before the villages, they did not simply declare the power of a new religion. They declared that everything belonging to African people was wrong, sinful, and deserving of burial. Those words fell upon the soul like blades, severing the thread that linked people to their ancestors. When one hears repeatedly that their blood is cursed, that their customs are evil, that the spirits of their people are demons, they begin to believe it, and the moment they believe is the moment the wound takes root in the soul. In the visions that followed, I saw children born in colonial times growing up with two contradictory images. One image was the face of their ancestors calling to them, loving them, teaching them through dreams. The other image was the face of those in power, coldly insisting that the ancestors were only darkness. When these two images collided, the child no longer knew which voice to trust, and thus the wound began. It was a confusion without a name, a feeling of being torn in two, a fear of listening to one's own intuition. In many revelations, I saw clearly how this division formed a kind of spiritual muteness, where people did not dare to hear the inner voice because they believed it was sinful. They did not dare to practice ancestral rituals because they feared rebellion. They did not dare to touch ancestral memory because they thought that memory was darkness. It was self-denial, and no separation is more painful than the separation between a person and their own soul. Teachings imposed across eras said that the African soul needed to be purified, but in the spiritual realm, no soul needs purification. What needs cleansing is the wound of denial carried through generations, the wound that made people forget that God had walked with their ancestors long before foreign forces arrived. Looking deeper, I saw the wound was not only spiritual loss, but the loss of the right to see oneself in sacred light. A child who grows up never hearing that God carries a face like their own, that light rests upon their land as well, that wisdom flows in their blood, will carry within them a sense of smallness, of weakness, of dependence. That is how the wound is sustained, not by violence, but by forgetting. Yet in a deeper layer, I saw the opposite beginning to rise. Buried memory is awakening. Young people feel the call of ancestors they were never taught about. They see images in dreams. They hear drum beats with no clear source. They feel a surrounding force when standing before the sea, the mountains, or the land of their forebears. These are signs that the wound is beginning to open for healing. Nothing in the spiritual realm is ever lost forever. Separation is temporary. When the soul begins to remember truth, light returns. And when light returns, every lie that bound an entire people becomes powerless. The wound of Africa will not be healed by denying the past, but by restoring it, by facing the truth that the soul of this continent once stood in the ranks of the light and is now returning to its rightful place.